Hello pattern readers. In this video I'm going to be talking about book to screen changes in the season 1 finale of The Wheel of Time. And it's going to be a tricky video because this episode was really pretty divisive. And the main divide seems to be between fans who have read the books and people who have only seen the show. I tend to talk to a lot of people who have read the books and are also watching the show. And for the most part, a lot of those people have been really on board with changes and enjoying the show. Until it came to this episode, where I see a lot of people really didn't like the episode and have a lot of criticisms of the book to screen changes. Whereas if you talk to non-book readers, from what I can gather, generally speaking, they have been really positive on the show in general, and that includes this episode. But this video in particular is for those book readers. And because there are so many changes that I've seen people discuss in this episode, I wanted to try to categorize them for myself to just make them a little bit easier to talk about. And some of them I can just kind of run through quickly. So I will talk about changes that I generally liked, changes that I'm basically neutral on for one reason or another, and then a couple that I didn't like. This video may include spoilers for all Wheel of Time books. If you have not finished reading the series and do not want to be massively spoiled, stop here or proceed at your own risk. Before I get into those categories, I did want to separately talk about everything to do with the cold open, the Age of Legends scene, because there are maybe some potential changes here, and I've certainly seen some people bothered by some of them. I end up with pretty much all of them saying, I'm not sure any of these things are actually changes, or if they are, they're of the very minor variety. For instance, some people are bothered by the phrasing that loathed and Telamon uses about the opportunity to cage the Dark One, and that being something that hasn't been done before. They're assuming that what he means is that the Dark One is completely loose and has never been imprisoned before. I think that's a huge leap, and I would not make that assumption. It doesn't seem in line with anything else that we can see is going on in that scene. And it seems like what someone's really bothered by is phrasing that doesn't exactly match their book understanding of something. And it's kind of similar with things like calling Lews-Therin the Dragon Reborn instead of the dragon. He was called the dragon in the books, and it's possible that they weren't aware that his soul had been reincarnated many times before, but it was. So it's not wrong to use the same term instead, the Dragon Reborn, the one that we're already familiar with, instead of making a distinction there. So those are very minor things. Or Latra being the Tamerlane seat, Watcher of the Flame, that's not a title that she held, not really important. We're trying to just make a parallel there with the current day Amerlin seat. There's no particular indication that the War of Power is going on in this scene. However, in the capital city that they're in, that city did remain untouched, so that's actually consistent with it. And perhaps they could have alluded to it in their dialogue. That might have been nice, but the fact that we don't see it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So let me start to get into some of the book to screen changes that I liked. And there's quite a number of them, actually. Some of them are big and some of them are kind of minor, but I'll mention them all. I ended up really liking that Rand and Moiraine were the only two to go to the Eye. That is a big change from the books, where all of the characters went, and initially I felt like I would have missed that, like the interaction of the group. The way it played out, I think it all worked out much for the better. We got some great Rand and Moiraine scenes, and we got to then have point of view characters at these other locations. Now, maybe not all of the characters in this episode had equal amounts of interesting things to do. That's definitely true. But if we think to what a lot of the characters had to do in that last sequence of The Eye of the World, the book, it's kind of the same thing. A lot of them were just kind of along for the ride. So I don't think we sort of lost out on anything from any of these characters by making that change. And if anything, we gained some things. Ishamael himself, not officially named in the show, but we know who he is. He seems a bit less crazy, a bit more with it, a bit more calculating. I'm actually pretty happy about that. I do enjoy sometimes, from a sort of campy factor, the ravings of Ishamael in the books, but I also think it's harder to pull it off well. It can work. You can have a raving villain who is also menacing, but it's riskier. So I don't mind that they changed this. I always kind of picture Ishamael like chewing on the scenery with the way he talks in the books. And ultimately, I really enjoyed the Ishamael that we've gotten so far. And who knows where he'll go from here. I liked the inclusion of Moiraine's story about an Aes Sedai that she admired beating her with the one power when she was struggling to channel. I like it from the standpoint of her opening up a little bit to Rand, but also I'm pretty sure we can guess who she's hinting at here, and that Aes Sedai is probably Elida, who we're probably going to meet in season 2. So I like that as a way of hinting at that relationship that hopefully we'll get to see on screen. I talked about this in my last video, but the number one favorite change that they made in this episode, and a big reason why this episode worked for me, is the change to how Rand versus Ishamael is playing out at the Eye of the World. There isn't a one power battle here. Instead, it is a psychological and moral conflict between the two of them. I think it beautifully foreshadows the very end of the series and the type of battle that takes place in Tarmangaiden. Even though Rand made the right decision and it seems like he's victorious, we can see in this little hint of a smile on Ishamael's face that his real goal wasn't to convince Rand to give in to him and let him remake the world in his image. Although, hey, if it worked out that way, great. But he was really trying to get him to break the seal, which would allow him then to move about more freely. So I just love all of that. Moiraine being unable to channel at the end. Initially, this was a change that I thought I didn't like. And the main reason why I thought I didn't like it was because it seemed like it might have been needlessly or unintentionally confusing. And I didn't like that. And I didn't really know where they were going with it either. But after reading some more and then going back and rewatching it, I think it's very much intentional. I think they want us to not be entirely clear on what happened to her. But I think the clues are there that she absolutely has not been stilled. She has been shielded and the shield tied off. I think we can see that in the similarity of the weaves on what's done to Moiraine and what's done to Logain when he is shielded. We have this little shot where it looks like Ishamael might be tying off the weave. The fact that Moiraine says she still can't lie. And we might also expect to see more of an effect on Lan if their bond had actually been broken instead of just continuing to be masked. So overall, I feel very confident that she's shielded, not stilled. But I also think that they're intentionally letting it be unclear. And Rafe Judkins talked about how this decision was made in order to lead into what Moiraine's storyline is going to be in season 2. Now, I don't know what that's going to be. Maybe I'll like it, maybe I won't like it. But for the time being, I'm totally okay with this choice. It might be interesting to see how she handles things in that circumstance. And I think we'll get some great acting out of it as well. We already have. The Horn of Valir being moved to Fal Dara. I think this was a great choice because many fans had been speculating for a while that it would make sense to see the horn stolen in the last episode of season 1, kind of as a hook into the plot for next season. And I always liked that idea. But if they had left the horn at the eye, there really would have been no way to accomplish that. How do you recover the horn at the eye and then bring it back to Fal Dara and then have it stolen? It's too many moving pieces for a single episode for it to make sense. So this expedited the whole thing and allowed the theft to happen as soon as we are finding out about it in a way that made perfect sense. So overall, that just simplified everything, and it was a change that made a lot of sense. Instead of having Rand somehow travel, or who knows exactly what he did at the end of book 1, but he somehow temporarily got himself to Tarwin's Gap to obliterate a bunch of shadow spawn and then went back to where he was and went somewhere else. That whole part was always super confusing, but some people still seem to be kind of bothered by the fact that Rand didn't get to do that. I like this change. Now, there's things about how this played out later that I don't like, but I do like the basic decision to have the force of channeling that destroys the shadow spawn come from a linked circle of 5 women led by Amalisa. I think that is a good choice. It gets Egwene and Nynaeve there, and I don't think there's anything wrong with not having Rand do those things. There are things that might be hard to explain later. Rand is going to have a ton of moments to shine throughout this series, so that he didn't get that particular one there, no problem with it. And again, I think the things he did do in the episode were more interesting than that. I even think it was a good choice to introduce the idea of burning out in this circle. Now, some people don't like this because in the book, the idea is that if you're in a circle, you're not supposed to be able to be burned out, that there is a buffer there to protect you. I don't mind if they are taking that away, and it's unclear if they are, because in some ways it's a little bit overpowered, this idea that if you're in a circle, you're linked to someone, you can't be burned out. Why aren't people linking more all the time then to prevent against that? If they do take that away, I'm totally fine with it. It's not clear if they have, because it also looks like maybe Amelisa, being less trained and certainly not used to handling this much of the power, might have not done the linking or the circle in the proper way, and that could have introduced this risk that is normally not there when trained Aes Sedai use it. The other thing that I like about this is that it showed us in a way that is memorable what it's like to really want to draw more of the power and not be able to let go, even though it is that dangerous that you put your very life and ability to channel at risk. We've seen it play out here in a horrible way. It makes that whole drug-like aspect of the one power very real, and so I am glad we got to see that. Later I'll get to things I didn't like about that, but those two basic ideas, having a linked circle of channelers do this instead of Rand, and introducing the idea of burning out, I like those things. And the last change that I liked was showing us the Shan-Chan as a hook at the ending. Mainly it's just giving us a little bit of a hint at what's to come, and I think that was a smart decision. You could try to pull out some other details here and talk about the differences, like for instance the fact that the Damani are wearing these muzzles or some other kind of mouth covering. Certainly from a visual standpoint, it makes it even more disturbing to see that. It's more dehumanizing even than the collar, which is bad enough. But we don't exactly know how these are going to be used. I assume they can't be on all the time. Damani still have to eat, so maybe it's something they only use in certain circumstances. And they seem to have made the collar look a little bit different than it's, sort of less necklace-like and more of like a shoulder piece. And they took away the leash, which was always non-functional. I think those are just like design choices, but overall excited for more of what we get from them next season. There are a bunch of changes I would best describe myself as neutral on, either because I don't think it's very consequential or because it just all depends on how it plays out and we don't know how that's going to be yet. So I'm going to run through those as well. The blight itself is less deadly. We do get Moiraine telling Rand not to touch anything, but you don't get the sense that you got in the books that if you touch something, you might literally die like that second. And we do see that like the branches and things are brushing up against them. It might have been cool if they could have portrayed it more the way it was in the book. However, it might have been difficult from a production standpoint, or at least it's a trade-off, because I think what they did accomplish is create a sort of claustrophobia in this set. But if you're going to do that, you can't really have it such that the actors aren't going to touch the set at all. It looked cool, just not the way that we might have imagined it. Moiraine gives Rand a male sa'angreal to use to amplify his power, rather than him using this pool of uncorrupted saidin that he had access to in the book. I don't think the eye itself was ever super important or super compelling in terms of what it was, and it might have been a thing that was harder to explain than a sa'angreal was. I think essentially it's a good choice that kind of simplifies what was happening there. And also they're introducing something that we will see again, angreal and sa'angreal, as opposed to something that we'll never see again, a pool of the power. To go along with that, there's sort of the change to the nature of what is the Eye of the World itself. It's not a pool of uncorrupted saidin. Perhaps it is the location of the Dark One's prison, but as we know from the books, there isn't really one physical location. And I think after watching this episode, we can say more likely it isn't really known. Moiraine herself says records were destroyed, so we don't know exactly what is here, besides probably one of the seals. We see that Rand cracks this symbol that matches the seals in the books. Now, the seals in the books were like something you could hold in your hand as opposed to something you can stand on. But is that true for all of the seals in the show? Maybe just this one is large and the rest are smaller focal points. We really don't know how that's going to play out. So it's something I have questions about, but nothing that I feel like really good or bad about until we see more of how that plays out. A lot of people seem bothered by the idea that Lord Agomar is not a great captain, either because maybe he's dead and he isn't going to come back, or because his tactics in the battle at Tarwin's Gap seemed questionable. So I want to kind of attack this bit by bit. Some of the arguments that Agomar wasn't making great tactical decisions, that might be something intentional. They do kind of hint at the idea that he himself has realized that maybe he's been a little bit arrogant and he should have asked for more help. And some of it might be due to like production realities, because they were trying to film these battles during a pandemic, and that might have definitely did limit some of what they were able to do in terms of battle scenes. But you can still legitimately ask questions like, why was their main defense just crossbows through these arrow slits? Like, could they not have at least like been using some kind of catapult or dropping things from the wall onto the Trollocs? There might have been other things that they could have used, and I think those are fair questions. Maybe Agomar isn't being portrayed as such a great military tactician as he was in the books. But I'm neutral on this change for now because I am still uncertain about how it's going to play out. Now, it looked like Agomar was killed, but we can also be not entirely sure of that. There were certainly some other fake out deaths in this episode, and I don't know for sure that he is dead here. Now, if he is dead, well, I guess he wasn't a great captain. He's not going to come back later in the last battle. But if he is alive, it then perhaps gives him an opportunity to grow and become better as a captain and a military tactician. If they are going to bother keeping him around as a character in the show, you probably would want to give him more of an arc. You don't bother keeping someone around for all of these seasons if they're just going to be this minor static character here and there. It's too expensive to do that. If they want to keep him around, they can develop him into more of a great captain later. Or he isn't going to be kept around, in which case, does it matter that he wasn't a great captain and he made some poor decisions there? Not really. At the same time, we got this scene of him basically saying, we're not going to win, but we can try to buy people time. We can try to warn people and help people be prepared. That is a valuable thing that he did, and it still makes him someone that you can admire, even if he turns out not to have been the most tactically brilliant person. Related to this, there's the question of why were Amelisa and her channelers out in the middle of this field? Why were they not in a more protected location, for instance, on the top of the fortress, where they could have had a vantage point on the shadow spawn, but wouldn't have been able to be rushed out in the open? And I think that is a valid question. However, the way I would interpret this and the why I'm more neutral on this is I don't think if Amelisa had wanted to bring her band of channelers to the fortress at Tarwin's Gap, I don't think Agomar would have been okay with that. He had ordered her to protect Faldara, the city. And this is a way that she can do that, but also use her channelers. This is something I think she decided on her own. I didn't get the impression that Agomar was aware of or would have approved her doing that. I think that's why it was where it was. Is it the most tactically best place for them to be? No, but I think there was a reason for it. And we also got some cool looking shots out of it, which I just enjoyed watching. Last thing that I will say I'm neutral on is Rand deciding to go off on his own and let his friends believe that he is dead. Some people argue that this seems out of character for Rand not to go back and make sure that his friends are okay. My argument there is if he truly believes that he is a danger to his friends and he wants to go away and protect them from him, which is something he did want at the beginning of the Great Hunt, he probably, maybe, is a little bit older and a little bit smart enough to recognize that unless they think he's dead, there's really no way his friends are going to just leave him alone. And he himself might not have the willpower to stay away from them if he goes back and checks on them. I think that is in keeping with his character. Maybe it's just different interpretations, but I can see all those elements in his character, parts of him in the Great Hunt and parts of him at the beginning of The Dragon Reborn, where he does just take off and leave everyone behind. And I think we are setting him up for a plot line in season 2 that's going to blend elements of The Dragon Reborn and The Great Hunt. So to me, that's potentially making sense, but we have to see where it goes from here to really say for sure. And I'll end on the things that I did not like, because there were some things. So the first one I would say is more of a minor variety. When Nynaeve tells Lan that she tracked Moiraine, not him, and that she can tell him how to track Moiraine, I didn't particularly like this. I mean, I liked it, the idea that she is giving him her blessing to leave her, to go without her, to do the more important thing, to go after people that they both care about. But I think that could have been accomplished without introducing the idea that Nynaeve could track Moiraine, but Lan couldn't. I know Lan is used to having his bond, but he's also a very capable tracker. They both are supposed to be, so I think it's just as reasonable for Lan to be able to just track using physical signs as Nynaeve would have been. And I think the scene would have been accomplished just as well if she had just gone to see him and just given him her blessing. Just said, I'm not going to try to stop you. I'm not going to try to go with you, but please bring Rand back. And I think that would have been enough to accomplish the scene without that bit. It's a relatively minor thing, so I'm not as upset about it as some people are, but yes, I didn't like it, and I think it would have been a small, easy thing to fix. Now for the bigger one. In general, I felt in this episode there were way too many fake out deaths. People that we are made to think are dead that will turn out not to be. But the one that bothered me the most was Nynaeve. So I don't have an issue with some of the women being burned out while they're linked, as I've already talked about. And I don't have an issue with Egwene healing Nynaeve of some injury. I think that part is okay. As we've seen, and it is being established, sometimes it just comes down to really wanting to accomplish something to be able to do it. That's how Wilders generally do things. For instance, no one taught Moiraine a weave to eavesdrop. She just really wanted to hear what people were saying, and so she just did it instinctively. And if Egwene wants to heal Nynaeve badly enough, do I think that she could accomplish that on some level? Yeah, I do. And so if we're going with the idea that Nynaeve has been injured, but is not dead or almost completely, dead or burned out, then I'm fine with that. Like that doesn't bother me at all. But I didn't like that they made it look like Nynaeve was dead. I know they were making some slight distinctions here with the makeup, and she didn't look quite as bad as the others, but it's a subtle thing. And if you are watching this and you don't know that death cannot be healed, this is something that would confuse people, and it might leave people questioning, can death be healed? Did Egwene just heal death? I don't like that. I don't think they should have skirted that line here, because I don't want that idea out there that maybe death can be healed. I think that lowers the stakes too much. I think they should have just, if they were going to do it more or less the way they did it, I would have made it clearer that Nynaeve was alive, maybe moaning in pain. You can still have Egwene heal her, and I think that's totally fine, but don't make it look like she's dead. Don't make it look like she is potentially as bad off as those other women were. What would have honestly made even more sense to me is, instead of having Nynaeve go over and sort of say goodbye to Egwene and take the power into herself to try to protect Egwene, I mean, she would do that, but I could also see Nynaeve going over to Amelisa and punching her or stabbing her, quite honestly, to get her to stop channeling. That was what I was honestly waiting for her to do in that scene, and I kind of wish they'd gone in that direction instead of having Nynaeve need to be healed at all. So there you have it. And my feelings have kind of, moved all over the place a little bit on this episode, both from when I first watched it and then taking in a lot of the reactions in the fandom and thinking through things and rewatching things on my own. Things have really shifted. But laying it out in this way, looking at all of the changes and kind of saying, these ones I liked and these I'm in the middle on, at least I have to see how some of them play out, or some things I think are kind of minor. And then there are a couple that I don't like. I mean, overall, this was an episode I enjoyed. I think they could have fixed these couple things, and for me, the episode then would have pretty much totally worked. And it's really interesting to see how much the reaction in the book fandom tends to be a lot more negative than it is among people who haven't read the books. I do see a lot of people kind of softening on it a little bit. Their initial reaction is like, oof, I don't know about this, I don't like it. And then they watch it and talk about it, and people end up feeling a little bit better. So, maybe you fall into that category as well. But all in all, I mean, if we look at this whole season, it's really wonderful what they've been able to accomplish. And there's so much that is positive to focus on. A lot of first seasons are not perfect. No first season is perfect, honestly. Shows have to grow, and they are dealing with a ton here. They had some extraordinarily difficult circumstances, especially in those final 2 episodes. This is a good show. It's really solid. It has some wonderful things that are really working. So I am really excited that we've gotten this high quality of a show with so many really strong essentials going for it, but still room to grow and become even better. We might have been much, much less lucky in that regard. I mean, if you're someone who just doesn't enjoy this show and you've made it this far watching all of my videos and this far into this one, I mean, that's fine too. Like, you don't have to like the same things I like. No show will be for everyone, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if this show is not for you, like, that's totally fair. It's more than to be expected. It's not going to be for everyone. But I am excited about it, and I certainly don't want to get bogged down too much in the things that could have been better. I mean, I think it's fair to talk about those things and to point them out, but not to let it make me feel less excited about all the wonderful things that are there and that we are getting. So that's my take on it. I hope hearing any of this helped you kind of process your thoughts and feelings on this episode. Feel free to share them with me in the comments. I'm really excited for some of the content I'm planning. So even though this season is over, there is a ton of interesting things to talk about, and I can't wait to start getting into that with you. So my goal had been to hit 5,000 subscribers on this channel by the end of the year. Doesn't look like I'm going to quite make it, but if you are watching all the way to the end here and you have not subscribed, please do help me hit that milestone. And I'm going to keep saying it. Gird your loins, my friends.